But you are absolutely going to love our next storyteller. Please give it up for Abasi Umoh.
A couple of things about me. I'm 22 years old. I'm queer. I'm fat. I'm genderqueer. And I'm brown. More specifically than brown, though, I'm Nigerian on my dad's side of the family. I didn't really have a chance to grow up in the culture, but over the past couple of years, my family and I have been able to travel to a national annual ACASAN convention. ACASAN standing for the Akwa Ibom State Association of Nigeria. It is this incredible convention that takes place once a year where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Akwa Ibom Nigerians living in America get to come together and gather and celebrate. So little did I know before I started attending these conventions that my dad is a pretty important elder within the community. Now, I found this out in two ways. The first, more subtle of the two, was when it occurred to me that I couldn't get more than 50 feet if I was walking with him before somebody would recognize him and stop him and proceed to talk to him for at least 10 minutes. Sometimes they would recognize him, I swear, by the back of his head. It made it impossible to get anywhere on time. The second way I realized what a prominent elder he was within the Akwa Ibom community was when I attended my first formal dinner. Now, they have one dinner every convention. It takes place in this grand ballroom. Imagine 100 round tables lined with pearly white tablecloth and silverware just neatly arranged in rows with plates so polished you can see your reflection on them. And in the very back of this giant room, there's one rectangular table up on a stage, and you can just glance at it from anywhere and know that that's where the important people sit. Yeah, my dad has a chair at that table. So during my first convention, I was thinking of that, but I was also thinking that even today, in 2019, thanks to the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, being queer in Nigeria is a crime. Just existing as a queer person is a punishable offense. So I had a lot on my mind during that first convention. But my family and I, we had some free time, so we found ourselves at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights Museum. We figured this convention took place in Atlanta, and we had never been before. We didn't know if we would ever have a chance to come back as a family, so we couldn't pass up an opportunity to see a museum so important and historic. The first thing I remember about that museum, funny enough, was the lighting of all things. I remember walking in and just feeling how dark it was. It felt gloomy and eerie, almost with an air of historic hopelessness. And in that, I saw my dad walk up and stand in line for an interactive exhibit. This was a lunch counter sit-in simulation. So naturally, I followed him, stood behind him in line. I had no idea what I was getting in for. So it was his turn. He walked up to this chair, almost imagine like a 60s retro diner, if you will, with like the stool and the counter, and he sits down on the stool, and he puts on these massive headphones, the kind that completely cover your ear and really immerse you in your experience. And he placed his palms face down on this counter in a very nonviolent fashion. And he sat there for what seemed like forever, but eventually he stood up, and to my absolute astonishment, he was crying. My father is a proud Nigerian man, and I had never seen him cry before, and here he was crying in public. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty nervous to go next, but I do. So like him, I sit down in the stool, I put on these headphones, I put my hands on this counter, and I close my eyes, and the simulation begins, and I can feel my chair start to throb and pulse like somebody's trying to kick it out from underneath me. I can hear people screaming, threatening to hurt me, to kill me. I can hear plates crashing and glasses shattering and the door slams shut, and then the simulation is over. And I found out later that that entire thing only lasted 1 minute and 36 seconds. But that experience will stay with me for the rest of my life. So I stood up and I turned around and I made eye contact with my dad, whose eyes were a little glossy, but he had stopped crying. But I understood why he had, because at this point I too am in tears. And we look at each other, and we don't really say anything. I think that in the moment, the experience was a little too raw. We hadn't quite unpacked it yet, so we just continued on with the museum. But I knew that both of us had a much deeper respect, even than we had had before, for the nonviolent sit-in activists of the 60s. But then we got to the end of the museum, and this part of the museum was the polar opposite of what the rest had been. You walk in and you just feel like you're bathing in warm yellow light, and it just feels really hopeful. And I walked in through this door, and the first thing I saw was this massive floor-to-ceiling mirror with a bunch of words etched into it. So I got closer. I'm a curious person. I wanted to see what the words were, right? But to my surprise, they weren't words. They were identities etched into this mirror. Cisgendered, Christian, trans, man, Black, Latino, just so many different identities, too many to count and too many to remember, but I saw myself reflected in all of that diversity and all of that glory, and I felt so empowered to be standing there. And with that feeling of empowerment, I continued to explore the museum until I came across this quilt on the wall that had clearly been hand-stitched, and it was just an image of a brown hand and a white hand just really tenderly holding each other. And even to this day, I'm not quite sure what it was about that quilt, but as I looked at it, I just had this profound thought, this realization. So I immediately called my dad over because I had to share it with him. I also think I was a little worried that if I waited too long, I might lose some of the courage to tell him what I was about to tell him. So he comes over, and I'm thinking, God damn, I am so proud of who I am, of my identities and all of my intersectionalities. So I told him that. Okay, mind you, I left that first part out because, this is my dad I'm talking to. But I tell him that I understand his struggle as a dark-skinned man living in this country, that the color of his skin affects every part of his life subtly or not so subtly. And I told him that hatred knows so many names. Homophobia, sexism, racism, those are just a couple of them. And I told him that when we walk out of our front doors, we do so as marginalized people, because we are. And we know that when we walk out into the world, it's clear that it was not designed for us. But I also asked him to try to understand what that looks like for me as a queer person, as a genderqueer person. Now, I gotta be real, I had no idea how he was going to react to this. I didn't really find out until later on that evening when we had gotten back to the hotel room. This was gonna be the night of that formal dinner that I described in that massive ballroom earlier. And I had asked him a couple days prior if I could wear one of his extra outfits to this event. And when I asked him, he didn't really give me a straight answer, so I dropped it. It was fine. But that night, when I got back to the hotel room, I walked in to find him dressed and looking sharp, if I may add. But there was also the extra outfit that I had asked to wear lying out on my bed. Now, if you don't know what Nigerian formal clothing looks like, you are in for a treat. Let me describe this outfit that I wanted to wear. It's this three-piece set. There's a matching hat and pants and this tunic that goes just a little bit past your knees. And it is all of these really intricate woven designs of this golden and this sea green and this bright blue color, and they're all woven together, and it's beautiful. And so you bet I did not wait to ask for permission. I just put it on. I put it on and I walked over to the mirror and I saw myself. Oh my God, my Snapchat story has never been so lit. I felt so handsome and so beautiful, and it was incredible. So we all went down to this dinner together as a family. And by the time we got there, it was already pretty full. Yeah, I wonder who made us late, right? But we walked in, and I can be completely honest when I say that everybody who saw me wearing that very masculine outfit, nobody had a neutral expression on their face. They reacted one of two ways. The first way, they either stared at me, mouth completely agape, horrified at the atrocity before them, or they just looked at me with beaming and affirmative smiles. Now, I don't want to end this on like too cheesy a note or anything, but I think every person in that room could have looked at me in complete horror. But what really mattered was that my father, at great possible cost to his social standing in his own community, had shown me that he loved me and accepted me for exactly who I am, and that meant everything to me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And and before I leave the stage, I just want to take a moment and thank my mom and thank my dad. They have both traveled hundreds of miles to be here today to support this cause and to support me, and that means so much to me. Thank you.